I'm Nima Rajan. Canada is offering financial help to the government of Ukraine. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced a $120 million loan at a morning news conference where he said Ukrainian officials requested financial help during a meeting in Kyiv this week with Foreign Minister Melanie Joly. He says the money will help support Ukraine's economic resilience and that Canada is exploring other options to bolster the country in the face of Russian aggression. Chief Public Health Officer Dr. Theresa Tam is warning COVID-19 hospitalizations and the number of patients needing critical care are still rising. She says the health system is under immense strain with so many health workers getting sick. But Dr. Tam also says there are positive signs that the Omicron wave is peaking, with case rates, share of positive tests, and wastewater surveillance all pointing to a decline in the spread of COVID-19 nationally. Well, meanwhile, Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly convened a virtual summit to talk about the future of Haiti. The country has been in a state of unrest since the summer when its president was assassinated. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Haiti's Prime Minister spoke at the Friday meeting. It was an attempt to coordinate security efforts and foster political stability and sustainable development. Statistics Canada says retail sales increased for the second month in a row in November to $58.1 billion. But the 0.7% gain was down from the 1.6% growth recorded in October. This indicates a slowdown in the burst in spending posted early last fall. That is underscored by Statistics Canada's preliminary estimate of a 2.1% drop in retail sales in December. The agency says consumers spent more in November for gasoline, building materials, and food and beverages. But retail sales were affected by severe flooding in British Columbia that impacted supply chains. Quebec's anti-corruption unit has launched a large-scale investigation into cases of alleged fraud related to the production and sale of false COVID-19 vaccine passports. Police warn that people who produce, sell, or use false COVID vaccination documents could face criminal charges, including breach of trust and corruption. The federal government's rapid housing program has once again surpassed its goal. The first $1 billion in funding created about 4,700 affordable units. This beat expectations, but left hundreds of applicants on the outside looking in when the program ran out of money. The Liberals revamped the program and added $1.5 billion in funding, which now appears to have created about 5,500 units. Ontario Transportation Minister Caroline Mulroney has announced 107 cities and towns with public transit systems will get an additional $120 million in funding this year. The province is topping up its usual level of funding to make up for reduced gas sales during the COVID-19 pandemic. About half of the more than $375 million in total funding will go to the City of Toronto. BC Hydro is reporting 2021 was a record-breaking year for electricity demand. 19 of its top 25 summer daily peak records were set during the heat dome in June. This includes a new summer high on June 28th as people cranked up their air conditioners and fans. The Crown Utilities says air conditioner use has climbed 50% in BC over the last decade. That's adding summertime peak loads to records that were usually set in winter. Court documents allege one of the 4 people who died of exposure trying to walk into the United States from Manitoba spent a significant amount of money to come to Canada with a fake student visa. 47-year-old Steve Shand has been charged with human smuggling. This was after 7 Indian citizens were found in North Dakota and bodies were discovered on the Canadian side of the border. The Indian nationals told border agents they'd been walking for more than 11 hours. The bodies of a family, including a baby who had become separated from the group overnight, were found just 10 meters from the border near Emerson, Manitoba. Federal Diversity and Inclusion Minister Ahmed Hussein is marking Lincoln Alexander Day by paying tribute to Canada's first Black MP, Cabinet Minister, and Lieutenant Governor of Ontario. He says Mr. Alexander exemplified what it meant to be of service to others and broke down barriers to make Canada a better place for everyone. Mr. Hussein described Mr. Alexander as a passionate advocate for the equality of Black Canadians and the advancement of education, race relations, and youth issues. Next month marks the beginning of Black History Month. Mr. Hussein announced that this year's theme will be February and Forever, celebrating Black history today and every day. Stay with us. We'll be back with our weekly energy update. Welcome back. Up next, we take a look at energy prices across Canada. We'll hear from Dan McTeague, Senior Petroleum Analyst at gaswizard.ca. All yours, Dan.
Thank you very much for that, Nima. And again, we have another week's review of oil, gasoline prices across Canada. And let me start very quickly. The average price in Canada went up about 3 cents a litre. Starting from the East Coast, Newfoundland, up to $1.61.5 for a litre of gasoline. Nova Scotia, $1.44. New Brunswick, we're pushing into the $1.48 range. Quebec, $1.57 a litre. That's up 6 cents a litre in 1 week. Ontario, up 4 cents a litre to $1.48.9 in places like Toronto. And of course, Western Canada holding off a little bit. Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Alberta, resisting the temptation to increase, but still holding between $1.37 and $1.39. BC Interior, still at $1.48, $1.49 a litre. Kamloops, Kelowna being something of the exception at $1.39 to $1.42. That's because of some competition among retailers, especially Costco. And of course, Vancouver still holding the $1.68, $1.69 range, with Victoria at $1.65. Look, this has been a very tumultuous week. This will, in fact, Nima, be the fifth week in a row that we've seen oil prices increase. Although today and yesterday we saw them back off a little bit. Markets like the NASDAQ down 9 or 10%, the tech stocks, et cetera. Oil is not suffering the same fate, only because we come back to the same problem that has been, more apparent, I think, for those of us who have been talking about predicting gas prices that will hit all-time high. And by the way, at $1.46, $1.45 is which is where we're at today across Canada on average. We're only 2 cents away from breaking all-time records set back in the middle of October. But for the many out there who have been concerned about other things, preoccupied with inflation, including food inflation, the elephant in the room is not supply chain. Those are important issues. But you'd hear from most analysts and experts, they don't want to talk about the one thing that is driving this, and that is the cost of energy. Bans, regulations, an increase in carbon taxes, and other factors are really driving, most importantly, the price of oil and gasoline much higher. When I say other factors, I'm dealing specifically and targeting those financial institutions that are embracing something called ESG mandates, environment, societal, and governance mandates, emphasizing disinvestment. At the very time in which the world needs more oil, they're disinvesting, and they're being led by not only the International Energy Agency, which never seems to get it right, basically telling us last May, let's stop investing in oil and natural gas. Let's make that green transition, to the Mark Carneys of this world, who are frankly going around buying foreign assets with a company he belongs to, but never buying Canadian assets. It's good to have pipelines in the Middle East. It's good to have oil companies in other parts of the world, but don't do that here in Canada. This kind of hypocrisy and the lack of message, I think, is really alarming for folks like me that have not only predicted gas prices would go up 20% this year, but I'm also saying there will be a concurrent increase of food prices in the same vein, 20 to 25%, not 5, not 7%, 20%. So that meat you're buying, those fresh vegetables, those other dry goods that you're buying, look for all of them to increase markedly. And with most families, not just being impacted with an increase of $400 to $500 a year in their fuel and diesel and heating bill, but also their food bill. We are quickly arriving at a point where I think the Prime Minister rather hypocritically admits that it is a concern. They're still going to heap a 25% increase on carbon taxes on April Fool's Day for those many provinces that fall into that jurisdiction. And at the same time, they're going to be introducing their clean fuel standard, the second carbon tax, which comes at the end of the year. Look, It is really time for our politicians to get real of all political stripes, because every single party in the House of Commons currently represented is in favor of carbon taxes. They have a choice: bankrupt the economy, drive energy prices high, drive the cost of living to unsustainable levels, or get real. And I think that's really the message for the week. I think that we're going to be seeing an average increase of about 2 cents a liter this week. It won't be as much as last week, but there is an inevitability to the rising prices in energy. And you have no one to blame but those that we've elected into Parliament. So that's it for this week, Nima. I don't want to leave it on a negative tone, but I think all of us listening have to understand the source. And it really does have to do with a lot of politicians, not industry, and certainly not those of us who are having to pay. We'll talk to you next week. Thanks for having me again, Nima.
All right, thanks for that, Dan. That was Dan McTeague, Senior Petroleum Analyst at GasWizard.ca. All right. Well, up next, we take a look at developments and changes in the world of cryptocurrencies and digital assets. We'll have our weekly update from Catherine Murray, the host of The Buck Stops Here, up next. So stay tuned. We'll be right back after the break. Welcome back. Up next, we take a look at developments in cryptocurrencies and digital assets. The weekly update from Catherine Murray, host of The Buck Stops Here, is up next. Take it away, Catherine.
Thanks, Nima. Hello, everyone, and welcome to your weekly cryptocurrency and digital asset update. I am Catherine Murray. Well, we are continuing to see a broad sell-off in cryptocurrencies. This is really following an overall risk-off sentiment in the economy as well as the markets. The NASDAQ, for one, is having its worst week since March of 2020, and actually one of its worst months since back in 2008. In aggregate, the market has sold off by about $200 billion in the past 24 hours. The total aggregate cryptocurrency market now stands at $1.8 trillion, still a large number. And the top 10 coins, Bitcoin and Ether, of course, are the two largest, are all down by approximately 10%. Polkadot as well as Solana are now down 18% over the past 7 days. So certainly a lot of pain being felt, but what's also really interesting is that there's still so much interest and new news in the space. So let me go through a few of those headlines with you. It's interesting to note Google, for one, they are forming a team focused on blockchain and other next generation distribution computing technology. So again, giving credit to the technology that's in place, and we'll see what those uses end up being. We're also hearing that the trading platform Robinhood are in a beta phase for a crypto wallet. Walmart, according to filings, revealed plans to create their own cryptocurrency and NFTs. And two large money managers are also entering the space. Brevan Howard, which is a very well-known hedge fund in the United States, is reportedly launching its first fund in the cryptocurrency space or digital assets. And also Man Group, which manages $140 billion, is launching a cryptocurrency digital asset fund. Here in Canada, interestingly as well, a crypto payment app called ShapePay just raised $44 million in a Series A funding. So again, more interest, more funds being raised. And it's also interesting to see the movement of people who perhaps were in traditional financial firms and roles moving into the cryptocurrency space. I know from my background, a lot of the traders I knew are now traders for cryptocurrencies. So as an example of that, the CEO of the LME, the London Metal Exchange, is stepping down to join a crypto custody services firm. In terms of what the size of this market may or may not be, Jefferies, a sell-side firm in the United States, is reporting that the NFT market could reach $35 billion in the near term, a few years out, $80 billion. And we're also hearing more buy-in. We've talked about this in the past, comments from New York's new mayor, Eric Adams. He said that his first paycheck will be converted into Bitcoin and Ethereum using Coinbase's direct deposit feature. And also, I would note from a regulatory perspective, we always want to keep our eyes on what the regulation is doing. We talked last week about the U.S. Federal Reserve releasing a paper on a central bank digital currency, CBDC, get used to hearing that, saying that it could be useful for consumers and businesses, and also to have a faster option in terms of payments between countries. They are accepting public comments over the next 4 months, in case you have any comment. Obviously, that's in the US, but nonetheless, obviously still observing and looking at a digital currency from central banks. We're hearing that from other central banks as well. That's not going away. Lastly, I would just note here that Jack Dorsey, of course, he's the co-founder of Twitter. He's going to be a keynote speaker at a conference, the MicroStrategy's annual Bitcoin for Corporations conference, which is going to be on February the 1st. It's a virtual conference, obviously, and it's part of World 2022. That's the conference, as I understand it. And again, he is a Bitcoin bull, will be the keynote speaker February the 1st at 12 o'clock. I believe it's free, and I think I'm going to be joining that and listening to hear what he and others have to say. Nima, I'll leave it there. Back to you.
That conference is certainly one to watch, Catherine. Thanks for that. That was Catherine Murray, host of The Buck Stops Here. All right, well, we've got more on the digital currencies report from the U.S. Federal Reserve now. It's aimed at making some sense out of cryptocurrencies and its digital cousins. The highly anticipated report says for now, the Fed would rather have banks and other financial firms manage digital accounts instead of doing that itself. The Fed's paper, while noting no decision has been made, says it would likely follow an intermediate model for a digital dollar, under which banks or payment firms would create accounts or digital wallets. We'll be right back after the break with a look at news from around the world. So stay tuned. We'll be right back on Forum Daily News. The United States and Russia aren't reporting any breakthroughs after talks over Ukraine. The U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, says Washington and its allies remain resolute in rejecting Russia's most important demands. Moscow has demanded that NATO promise Ukraine will never be allowed to join the alliance. And it wants NATO to remove troops and military equipment from parts of Eastern Europe. Mr. Blinken told Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov that the U.S. will present Russia with written responses to its proposals next week. The World Health Organization is now recommending booster shots of COVID-19 vaccine, starting with the highest priority groups. That's a shift from its previous insistence that boosters weren't necessary for healthy adults. Last year, the WHO pleaded with rich countries to stop offering booster doses until the end of 2021. This to allow for vaccine distribution to developing countries, which was an appeal that was almost entirely ignored. Beijing Olympic organizers are going to limit the torch relay to just 3 days, and they say the flame will be displayed only in enclosed venues due to COVID-19 concerns. The relay will run from February 2nd to the 4th through the competition areas, including downtown Beijing. Torch bearers will undergo health screening and be carefully monitored starting from 2 weeks before the event begins. Meanwhile, the president of the UN General Assembly is appealing to the UN's 193 member nations to take concrete actions to promote peace during next month's Winter Olympics in Beijing. In Cameroon, Abdullah Shahid also called on all warring parties in conflicts around the world to agree to true mutual ceasefires during the Olympic truce, before, during, and after the Olympics. Members of the Islamic State group have launched 2 sophisticated and deadly attacks in Syria and Iraq. Iraqi and Syrian officials and activists have said Friday's attacks left 11 Iraqi soldiers dead and at least 7 U.S.-backed Syrian fighters. At least 23 IS gunmen were also killed when about 100 extremists tried to storm a prison in northeast Syria. It was housing about 3,000 suspected extremists, including former IS commanders. The attacks are believed to be the largest since IS lost the final piece of land it held nearly 3 years ago. A Taliban delegation will travel to Norway next week for talks. The Norwegian Foreign Ministry said Friday that it has invited representatives of the Taliban to Oslo from January 23rd to January 25th. The Norwegian foreign minister stressed that the meeting was not a legitimation or recognition of the Taliban, but we must talk to those who in practice govern the country today. 2 of the world's largest energy conglomerates are stopping all operations in Myanmar. Total Energies and Chevron are citing rampant human rights abuses and the deteriorating rule of law since the country's military overthrew the government. The announcement came today, just a day after Total called for international sanctions targeting the country's oil and gas sector, which remains one of the military government's primary sources of funding. A shortage of parts caused by the pandemic is further denting production at Japan's top automaker. Toyota will halt production at 11 plants in Japan for 3 days, on top of reductions already planned in February. Supplies are running short because of a lack of computer chips. The pandemic has disrupted other areas, including shipping, the oil supply, and meat packing. Officials in Africa say at least 17 people have been killed and dozens more injured when a vehicle carrying mining explosives collided with a motorcycle and blew up in western Ghana. The crash happened while the vehicle was carrying explosives to the Chirano gold mine in Apieti. Tributes are pouring in following the death of rock superstar Meatloaf at the age of 74. Meatloaf was loved by millions for 1977's epic Bat Out of Hell album and for theatrical rock anthems including Paradise by the Dashboard Light, 2 Out of 3 Ain't Bad, and I'd Do Anything for Love, but I Won't Do That. Well, this survival story hits the nail on the head when it comes to luck and circumstances. A retired carpenter says he survived in the ocean overnight after the Tonga tsunami swept him out to sea. The tale of 57-year-old Lesala Forlau, who has disabilities that make walking hard but floating easy, has captivated people for how he floated and swam from one island to another and to 2 more. Some have affectionately dubbed him Aquaman. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and thank you for joining us today for Forum Daily News. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time.